My initial reaction to this bill was not very kind towards the government, because I'm always struck by how this government feels that it needs to pass legislation to do or to provide conditions that many would expect they would do it as a matter of course. So when I have a government that needs to pass a Fiscal Responsibility Act to keep itself from going into debt, I have to shake my head and laugh. Well, duh. Governments are supposed to manage their resources responsibly. Why did this government feel it needed to pass an act of legislation to keep itself in line? That always struck me as really odd, Mr. Speaker. But, well, I guess history proved them right and me wrong, because they did need a piece of legislation to try and keep them under control, and it didn't work very well. I remember when I guess he'd now be surely he's not the federal finance minister, but maybe he is, the former member of Red Deer South, who was then our treasurer, bringing in, it was called something around fiscal administration or responsibility. But, I mean, that's what it was supposed to do, was keep them from running up a deficit. And yet that bill came back every single year for an amendment to adjust everything so whatever they decided to do that year would still be legal, but they'd already done it, so this was being passed, after the fact. And again, and I thought, well, that makes a mockery of the whole process. You say you need this legislation to keep yourself in line, and then you're going to go outside of the lines of it, and then you've got to hurriedly change the boundaries of it in order that, so that after the fact you can say that you didn't actually contravene your own act. It's a level of public spin that I think brings all of us into question by the population. They look at us and go, what the heck are you guys doing? It doesn't make any sense. And frankly, I agree. So when I heard that the government had brought forward an act called the Competitiveness Act, I had exactly the same reaction. I rolled my eyes heavenward and went, oh, here we go again. And then I read through the Act and thought, you have got to be kidding me. This is the Premier's flagship bill. This is what we're going to put forward as the big news from 2010 legislative sitting. That's it. Guys, it's 3 pages long. It's just a tiniest bit short on substance, if you know what I mean. And is it actually going to, do anything? Well, no. They're going to form a committee. I think that's... yeah, but there's some substance and some value to the small packages, and that's not what I'm seeing in here. So I think that what it actually establishes a board or a committee to go and look at this stuff. So all this talk, all this hype about, how competitive we are, and what are we going to do? We're going to establish a board or something to come up with whatever this is. So I've had a couple of weeks since this was introduced to actually think about this, and I have two reactions to it. I was reading the comments of my colleague from Edmonton Riverview, and he has brought forward a really interesting perspective that in its most basic elements I agree with. And I think that is the essence of my the basis of the disagreements that I often end up having with members of the government, because I don't think that the only role of government is to enable the private sector to make money. I think there are roles for the government There are roles for the government around protection, whether that's protection of the vulnerable or protection of Albertans in a consumer protection way, which is why I brought forward things like the concerns I was raising about Ticketmaster, which is why I brought forward concerns around payday loans. It's why I brought forward concerns around heat metering. Those were all consumer protection issues, in essence. So obviously that's deeply important to me, and I am concerned that we continue to think of our constituents, of our citizens, as clients, as taxpayers. And that's the only role this government seems to be willing to assign people. You're either a client, i.e. a recipient of services, or you're a taxpayer. But this government doesn't seem to be willing to look upon the people who live in our province as constituents, as citizens, people who have more in their life than the agenda that the government puts forward. So I want to say that I do agree with the intent of what Riverview has said. Well, the other thing that occurred to me as I thought about this act was, what competitiveness? What competitiveness are you talking about? Because we focus so much on the oil and gas sector in this province. I've never worked in the oil and gas sector, and I've never worked in the support services for the oil and gas sector. I have spent my working career in public service and in the NGO sector, which is a significant sector in Alberta, but we all tend to not want to think about that for some reason. But I was struck by a couple of things I've been looking into recently in which Alberta has an opportunity. It's laid in front of them how they could be more competitive. In other words, get more business for the benefit of Alberta citizens, and they choose not to take advantage of it. And that perplexes me. And I'm going to focus in on that one and give you a really specific example to think about, because Alberta is more than oil and gas. And let me say right off, don't bother bashing me that I'm not appreciative of the oil and gas sector, because I am. I like that money. I like that money because it builds things like art galleries, it funds our schools, it makes a lot of things possible for us. It makes us a wealthy, wealthy province. And I am not going to bash them. I understand where that money's coming from. I want a better balance with environmental protection, and I also won't back off on saying that stuff. But that's not the only thing that can be used in this province to be competitive. So I want to talk about the film sector. Now, this is low-hanging fruit, guys. This is easy. We have a film sector in Alberta. It's easy to sell Alberta's natural beauty, and you may not be aware, but we have very unique light in Alberta that shows up on film stock. It's why people like to come and shoot films here, because our big sky country and the quality, literally the quality of the light, makes films look really good. So it's low-hanging fruit. To get people to come here is not hard, right? We have a certain amount of natural resource that they want to take advantage of. We have trained people. Both SAIT and NAIT train people to work in film and television production. We have unions who willingly take those students from SAIT and NAIT and work with them and have programs that work those students into the actual production in film and television. And then we have a regulatory regime which is so ass backwards that we are losing competition.